Hi all, and welcome to this webinar. Good to see we have so many attendees from different locations and countries. My name is Rutger de Jong. I work for Survoy as a sales manager. And for those who don't know us, in short, Survoy is a software development platform especially used to build hybrid web and cloud applications. And today we will be talking about reasons to go for a web or cloud strategy, challenges that could come with that, what different options are there, and how can you as a FoxPro developer benefit from the server platform. Of course, we think it's most powerful to discuss real customer showcases. We also invited a server customer who has a strong background in both Survoy and FoxPro, and who will tell you about her experiences with both technologies. And yeah, we always try to make this webinar as interactive as possible. So if you have questions during this session, please use the chat panel for that. I will be monitoring that session during this webinar. So please feel free to ask questions. And also this webinar will be recorded and shared afterwards. So if you want to look at that or want to share it with others, you're possible to do this. Okay, yeah, I think it's time to hand over to the host of this session, Sean Devlin. Sean, are you there?
Hi, Rutger. Yeah. Hey, I just want to check real quick. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, definitely.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. I should just introduce myself real quick. I help to run Survoy's North American projects, and I also work closely with our partners and our users to develop our product strategy. And I've spent a lot of years helping our partners to transition their companies through changes in the market, changes in technology disruptions. And so I've learned a bit in watching our customers and partners go through these changes. Which brings me to what I'd like to discuss today. Since I've been working with mostly ISVs and enterprise application teams, I see very talented folks delivering high value applications, high value functionality in their industries, and that really set their businesses apart. But once in a long while, software teams will face challenges that require more than incremental improvements to their offering, rolling out new features or new versions or fixing bugs. It might be a market disruption. It might be a hard technical barrier or limitation to go to the next level. But whatever it might be, it's not the usual day-to-day business, and it can be quite challenging, even for really talented teams. So if you have found yourself in that position, that's good, because that's why we've created this webinar. And I could share my experiences, but I thought it might be better to bring someone who has been there, someone who has been kind of at the crossroads and faced down the challenges and come out the other side, so that we could learn from her experience. Therefore, I'm happy to welcome Quail Hill, who's a lead application developer at Beta Healthcare. Quail, are you there?
I am. Good morning.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Quail's on the West Coast, so it's early. So I appreciate her taking time out of her busy mornings to join us. Quail, can you tell us a little bit about why does Beta Healthcare exist, and what kind of applications do you build for them?
Sure. The company started back in 1979. We work in insurance for public and nonprofit hospitals. At the time, there was an insurance crisis because the rates were just skyrocketing. So a bunch of companies got together, or hospitals, and said, okay, let's pool our money together and insure ourselves. And we were basically formed to manage that money. And that's what we've been doing. And so it's a really interesting way, because our core business is nonprofit. We're there to service our members. and help them get the best insurance possible.
And just to clarify for our listeners, this is not regular patient healthcare insurance. This is
correct.
Professional liability.
Medical malpractice.
Okay, awesome. Perhaps you could talk a bit about the first generation of the core technology that was used to run Beta Healthcare. What did it look like when you started, and how did your team use FoxPro to enhance your offering?
Right. So we had purchased a product called Omega, which was a FoxPro based product, and that handled our claims and underwriting, our policies.
Okay.
And then they went out of business, but we had a clause that said we got the source code if they went out of business. And so we took that source code and we're like, okay, it's ours now. We hired a FoxPro developer and we continued to enhance the product. We upgraded FoxPro. I think that was back early when I've been with the company 19 years, probably about first or second year in before I actually started developing. That's when we did that upgrade. And we have been continually modifying the product since we got the source code, because there's always ways that our customers wanted to do it.
Sorry, the first upgrade was to Visual FoxPro then?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Right. And how did the application grow, and how did the company grow with the Visual FoxPro application at that time?
Well, there's always, more data that they want to collect, more ways that they want to serve up that data, reports that they want to run, different things that they want to see. We also added a separate application that was not quite connected, that we built in FoxPro to store our contacts in, that we linked up to this main application because it never had a contact management system that was really set up. And we added quite a few different modules to it to again track more data. And so we were constantly, and that's kind of where I started the project is, I wasn't a developer at the time. And my boss said, hey, you want to learn how to do this? We've got a FoxPro developer who can teach you. And I'm like, sure, why not? And so I jumped right in, and we just kept changing things as needed. Right.
Well, aside from the fact that you're a rock star developer, FoxPro was pretty easy to pick up and productive.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I myself have interacted with a lot of FoxPro-based companies, and what's clear to me is that they find it to be incredibly productive and easy to learn and implement data-driven applications and reports and things like that. But at some point, there was probably some limitations in Quail. I know that the big elephant is obviously the FoxPro end of life. But I can imagine that for a company like Beta, whose business is, in risk management also, this is a pretty compelling reason. But I'm sure there were other factors at play when you decided to, when you were looking at alternatives to continuing to run in FoxPro. Can you discuss what motivations you had and what options you considered?
Sure. Obviously, the end of life was kind of out there, and we didn't know how that would affect us, but we knew that the database wasn't going to last forever. And so we like to be proactive about trying to, and we're also looking at other technology out there, and it's like, okay, our application is getting a bit dated. There's things that we really can't do in this application that other applications can do, and we kind of want to do that. And then we're also looking at, well, is there an application out there that we could buy that does what we do? And that answer was no.
Right.
There was no application out there that did everything that our application did or that we wanted our application to do. So we're like, okay, well, let's just upgrade our application to a completely different language. Let's learn something new.
Right. It seems from my perspective that Beta Healthcare is a software company. Maybe I'm just biased, or I know all the technology people. I know there's lots of other staff there that are users of your application. But it's interesting to me what you said, that there was lots of other things that you knew you wanted to do and would help your organization, and what I've seen with a lot of FoxPro companies is that the end of life for FoxPro is a big issue, but at the end of the day, it's still running for a lot of people, and it can be considered a risk, but there's lots of other reasons that they chose to modernize, above and beyond that. I'm wondering, Quayle, if you can think back to what was your mindset when you were facing this decision, and you had ostensibly just learned FoxPro and built, new functionality in FoxPro. What were you considering for your next, going to the next level? Where did you see risk? Where did you see opportunity?
Well, we knew rewriting the application was going to be a risk. It's a large application, and having to learn a brand new language in order to write our new application, and just the amount of time, and plus there were things that they didn't like about how we did things in the old applications. So we were going to have to rewrite those. So, and also just because of the enormity of the application, how do we start? Where do we, how do we get this application online so that people can use it and not take 10 years? Because that's not okay.
Right. Yeah, it's incredibly risky. I can remember one of our first meetings, actually discussing the risks and possible approaches. And I remember one of your senior FoxPro developers, his head was kind of spinning as we were talking about, the sheer volume of database tables, DBF files that would need to migrate, and nice to have schema changes, like things that you knew you wanted to do on the database side, which meant data migration scripts, and let alone all the functionality that had to be implemented, and probably changes that you wanted to make into how it worked as well, plus all the non-functionals like security and navigation. And I can remember too that it was getting started was just figuring out where to start and what to do first. So maybe you can tell us a bit about how did you completely modernize this application over the past few years without taking it offline or without a big disruptive hard switch for the users that rely on it for the day-to-day business?
Sure. So what we decided to do was we decided that we could launch it one module at a time. And how we managed that was we basically started migrating the tables over as we were ready to use them in that module. And then we were able to sync the data back and forth, which was a task, no joke, trying to get that data to stay updated if we're making changes in two databases. But we did that on a limited number of tables. We really tried to make sure that once we launched something in the new application, we're like, we need you to use the new application for this functionality. It took us from launch until almost 3 years later to get the entire application moved. But we were able to launch it, and some of our users were able to fully use the new application from day one. Some of them had to kind of use a combo approach, but we were able to give them that functionality, and they really loved it. We gave them a lot of things that they couldn't do before. Right.
And risk was going down continually through the project with that approach. I can imagine that.
Absolutely, because as soon as we got something working better than before, they're like, oh, well, that's really helpful. That's kind of what we needed, and of course you've got also the risk of all of our reports were in VFP and they all had to be moved. And so we had to do that in conjunction. And so sometimes that was a bump in the road. So we've got the coding ready, we're ready to launch it, but the reports aren't ready to support it.
Right. And so, how many developers was it in that effort?
We started off with 2 developers, myself and the other senior developer at the time. and basically we did the whole project. Near the end, we brought on a third junior developer, and now I have a team of 4. You know, so it's, you know, having a smaller team, it takes it longer.
Well, yeah, and based on what I've seen, you know, 3 years to move an application as large as you had, you know, well, keeping it running and doing it module by module, that's I think quite impressive, you know, considering the number of developers you had, and I think that's common for these types of applications for ISVs and enterprise application teams. That is not like the whole IT department where you go and hire 6 new people for a project. It's, you got to work with the army you have and you know, plan for all that. Can you talk about the learning curve? You know, I can imagine not only are you responsible for this large project, but you had to learn new tooling while you planned and executed all of this stuff. And how was the learning curve? How was your ramp up time? Were you productive right away? That kind of thing.
You know, I think it took us a little bit of time. I mean, we obviously we got some training from Savoy because that's what we needed to kind of get used to this new language. But honestly, it wasn't terribly difficult to make that change because the tools that that we had were suddenly, they were giving us code complete. They were giving us error logging. You know, if we typed something wrong, it would often tell us, you know, obviously it doesn't fix business logic, but you know, it helps us learn the code because it's kind of helping us along saying, oh, wait, you didn't do that right. And we didn't have that in FoxPro.
Oh, okay.
It was a lot harder to debug.
Right.
And so the new debugging tools, that was huge. You know, so all of a sudden we were able to get going pretty quickly. So that part of it, I don't think was very difficult. I mean, the biggest thing was when you're in the middle of migrating an application and they're like, but could you do this whole section differently? Could you change the entire core logic of this major part of your application? Sure, why not? Let's do that.
Yeah. And then could you, but also should you?
Well, you know, the should's always there too. And honestly, our application would have been moved much faster if we hadn't done that.
Right.
If we hadn't said, yes, we really should redo this core piece of our programming because we don't like how we did it the first time. We want to do it completely differently. And that was, honestly, it was our rating module, which has to do with how we rate our policies. So it's an extremely complex piece of code.
Right. I remember that. Yeah.
And that's honestly, that's what took us another couple years was and we launched the rating module in parts. We didn't even launch it all at one time.
You did that later, right? You did all like claims and policies first.
After we launched the application, now we're like, okay, now we're going to go back and we're going to launch the rating module, but one coverage line at a time. Right. So we launched auto first because it's pretty simple. And we're like, we can get auto done. It's online. Great. Now that it's launched, they're using it in the new application. Now we're going to work on the next, the next build off of that. And so again, we're providing functionality quicker to our users because all of a sudden this works. Right. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, what's next? What's the impact on the users today? I know that you sent me a mail like a month ago or so that said you finally took the last DBF files offline. I think it was
last month.
Right. So now you're done, right? Now you can put your sunglasses on and recline.
Yeah, that would be a no. We are actually launching 2 small applications next month. These are going to be customer-facing portals. They're going to be online, which is super exciting for us because we've been using the Smart Client. So it's all been internal. We're about to launch our first 2 online applications, and they're just small data collection applications. They are going to allow us to send out questionnaires to users. We're going to be able to collect some claims data that we can just suck right into the appropriate databases. And we're also working on migrating our main application now that it's completely in one application. We're going to now migrate it to the NG application so that we can get it online.
Right.
So
and
the work never stops.
I should clarify for our users, the NG application is Servoy's HTML5 client. The first migration beta did was to our smart client, which was like a thin desktop client.
And so, yeah, so we're, you know, the work never stops. We're starting that new application. In fact, we're hoping we'll get all three in their first iteration launched here within the next month.
Right.
And again, we're not doing the whole application. Our new application is going to have a couple modules that actually weren't in the old application. These are brand new modules. And then gradually we'll bring the old modules in as well. Because eventually we want everything to be here.
Is that, is the migration from the desktop client to the HTML5 client, is that, how does that compare in terms of level of effort compared to migrating from FoxPro to Servoy?
It's much easier because we already know a lot. We're not having to deal with structural changes to our databases anymore because we've already brought all of our data from VFP into SQL because that's our backend. And so now it's just, you know, we're developing new tables now. We're setting things up. Honestly, the biggest problem is the fact that there's so many newer features that we haven't been able to use even in the smart client. It's kind of like, you know, when we went from VFP to the smart client, we got all these new features. And now that we're going to NG, we've got even more. And so keeping the development team focused on only putting in so many new spiffy features on our screen is difficult. They're like, but I could do this and I could do this. And I'm like, after we launch, we'll talk about it.
There you go. keep that leash short.
Absolutely. But we're able to create a much more modern application. It looks fabulous. We're going to be online so our users can connect from wherever they are, which is something big because not only did we, you know, move this VFP database over, we've got another database which was also done in SQL, which at least we're not dealing with a separate thing, that we're going to be taking the functionality from that database and putting it in ours so we can get that database offline.
Right.
And we don't have the source code to that. We're just taking what we know our users need to be able to do that they were able to do in this old application and putting it into our application. Right. So never
software
ends.
is never done. Well, what I think is interesting is that now that you've modernized your platform, you guys are doing things like you know, portal and, you know, and customer facing type portal things that probably weren't really in the realm of possibility a number of years ago, based on your old platform. So that's really exciting to see. Very cool. I think that it's probably makes sense to talk a little bit about who Servoy is. It was rumored that Servoy was created by 4 guys in a windmill. I think it's certainly plausible because it was founded in Holland. But what I do know is that the founders have a rapid application development background, and they were frustrated by limitations of the tooling of the time. To be able to build applications quickly was one thing, but then to be able to run them over the internet, run them at scale. So, you know, being able to do SaaS and cloud, mobile web, that was all nowhere in the realm of possibility for RAD tools when Servoy was founded. I would say that one thing that we focus on at Servoy is sort of starting from the end. So not just looking at technology in and of itself, but looking at what do finished applications need, what do teams need while they're building applications. we started, and you saw this in the screenshots with beta, with our smart client, which was like a thin desktop client that ran over the internet. It was zero installation, and it was cross-platform. So in fact, that was our SaaS sort of offering before SaaS was a word. I think people were saying ASP back then. That is still widely used today. But then around 2006, we added a browser from the same code base. And what this meant was that people could take the applications they had built in Servoy and now suddenly run them in a browser. There was actually no real rewrite or refactor needed. It even had pixel parity with the desktop version. So people could launch the same application in a desktop client or over the internet. And that was largely in response to, I think there was a market pressure for kind of like IT liberation, not to have to install anything. You did have to run Java to run Servoy's smart client, and also being able to run out of local area networks, that sort of thing. And then about 5 years ago, we could see that the UX requirements were really a driving force in the business-to-business landscape. So we offered our NG client, our next generation HTML5 client. You saw some screenshots of the newer stuff that Beta Healthcare has been building in that. And that really provided UX freedom. Before, it was a very framework, drag drop. It still is drag drop and script. But as Quayle was saying, there's a lot more freedom you can do in the HTML5 client. Pretty much anything that you can do in HTML and CSS can be done in Servoy. In the NG client. So with that, we went for UX freedom. Just because we were focused on RAD, we knew that there shouldn't be limitations in, like I said, UX, but also how applications are deployed, what kinds of operating systems they can run on, browsers, devices, tablets, mobile, hardware, different data sources. An application built in Servoy can have data binding against any relational database and very non-standard databases, and even web services and cloud services, all with the same set of tooling. So we like to focus on standards, compliant, open architecture type approach. We believe that business applications should be out of the box with all the non-functional requirements. So being able to scale for the internet, being secure, being able to perform adequately over the internet, over wide area networks. Cloud neutrality. You should be able to deploy business applications on public clouds, on private clouds, on premise and mixed. And we have a lot of customers that will have deployments which run in a data center, either their own or on AWS or something. But at the same time, they have deployments of the same applications which also run on premise. So they have that kind of hybrid setup, and that's quite common. And we believe that software developers should have total flexibility for that. We also believe that applications should be able to integrate in the ecospace where they run. 10 years ago, I think it was fine to have an application which was totally niche, fulfilled one business function or workflow in isolation. But today, you need to meet users where they are. You need to be able to talk to all the other tools and services that they are using. And we believe that applications built in Servoy can integrate with other software, APIs, cloud services, and especially legacy systems, because legacy systems don't go away too quickly, and we feel that's an important part of any strategy. Very recently, we've focused on our own cloud strategy, starting with DevOps. I sort of took us through the evolution of Servoy products over the years, and how that's been shaped by market forces. And lately, we've noticed that teams, typically, smaller teams, they will really spend a lot of their bandwidth and their expertise on DevOps when they should be focusing on their, their functionality and the value they bring to their users. So we have a new product called Servoy Cloud, which includes a automated pipeline. So build, test, deploy, all automated in the Servoy cloud. And we're finding a lot of success with that approach by removing that burden. So again, people building applications can focus on UX and focus on function. The bottom line is that we really understand software vendors. We really understand enterprise application teams. We know what challenges they face day to day. We also know what challenges they face once in a great while, as I said at the beginning, that every now and then the tools that you have and the expertise that you have are not up to the challenge that you face, and you need to go to the next level. So I'm gonna leave this slide up here, and I also have prepared a poll that I'm gonna share. I'm gonna launch this poll, and we'll take some questions here from the audience. But we'll really encourage you guys to talk to us if you want to have us take a look at your application or your business and give you an evaluation of if Servoy could be a good fit. If any of the story from Quail was compelling to you, then I think it's worth talking. Rutger, are you still there? And do we have any questions coming in?
Well, I think people are still digesting all the content.
Okay.
Not so many questions.
Cool.
No, someone is saying that he's eager to start, but he is a bit wondering how he should start. It's definitely something he could discuss with us. We can help him with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anybody have any questions for Quail about data syncing or migrating from DBFs to SQL Server, or what they did with all their reports, or I could go on and on. No. Okay.
There's one question coming in as we speak.
Sure.
Kevin Scott, he's asking, what is the main programming language used within Servoy?
Okay, it's JavaScript. And I should qualify that it's a sort of a pure server-side JavaScript. So that means we're not writing JavaScript that runs in a browser, or you need to know about low-level DOM stuff. It's just a scripting language to expose all of the APIs in Servoy.
There's another question coming in, which is about reporting. I think it's for Quail. So how were you able to convert reports?
Well, basically, we couldn't really convert them. We went from a system called R&R, and then we migrated them into Crystal by rewriting them. It took a long time, and then they decided they didn't want to use Crystal anymore, so now we're migrating them again to SSRS. Okay. And so it was a very long process. To have to migrate, to basically rewrite all those reports. But we looked at all the reports, made sure we were only using the ones that we really needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also a question coming in about the database. Which database Servoy uses?
Okay, that might be a question for Quail. Servoy will work with any relational database and even many non-standard databases and flat files. For example, we can connect directly to DBFs as well. Quail, can you tell the audience what database did you guys decide on to move from DBF files?
Well, we went with SQL because that was a database that we were already using for a bunch of our applications. So we wanted to stick with something we already had. Right. And it also makes it easier for any applications to talk to those databases that use SQL. So,
yeah, I should point out too that we have customers that deploy multiple different database vendors, and an application built in Servoy will run on different databases. It's not like you build for one and then if you migrate, it won't work. So we, especially for where there's IT requirements that they use Oracle or SQL Server, we see that a lot, and we have customers that will deploy to both from the same code base, so that's not a problem.
Yeah. Got another question about specific reporting functions that Servoy offers. Sean, can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, there is like a built-in reporting engine in Servoy, so that the form designer can also be double as a report designer. However, we believe in integrating with the best tools and technology out there. So what we recommend and what most people do is they bring their own BI system. The most common one we see is Jasper reports, but also Crystal reports, Pentaho, Velocity, Tableau, you name it. And I would also say about reporting, a lot of times we see these large applications with many reports, hundreds of reports. And I would just point out that when it's done in an agile sense and people really evaluate what purpose they serve and which reports they need, a lot of the number of reports goes down depending on how they're implemented, what tools are chosen. So for example, you might have 10 reports where the main difference is the kinds of filters, or that there's a few different fields on each report, et cetera. With modern BI tools, that can be solved without redesigning 10 reports. So the grunt work of it goes down. And in fact, the user sort of flexibility goes up. And we see lots of ad hoc reporting solutions where end users can design their own reports, et cetera. So it's worth like looking at from a totally fresh perspective.
Okay. I think there's one more question. Can Consortivoir handle or call .NET assemblies?
Technically, yes, but that can be some trouble. So it's not recommended. We do have situations where people do keep their business logic from their legacy platform. But what I would say to this attendee is that the most common approach with a .NET or another proprietary kind of setup for integration is to expose those as web services. So we've seen ISVs and enterprise applications have a lot of success by leveraging their existing systems via web services. And in fact, Servoy has a data binding approach where you can treat those almost like a database, and all of the data binding, caching, and querying and that sort of thing works still against that approach.
Okay. I don't see any other questions for the moment.
Okay. Well, then the last thing I want to do is to say a big thank you to Quail. She's a busy lady and has lots to do on her early mornings. So Quail, it's been a pleasure working with you and your team over the years, and I really appreciate you sharing your experience with this audience, and I hope they found your story useful and applicable to their situation. So thanks for that. I also want to thank all of the attendees for joining us. Again, the webinar is recorded and will be posted shortly, so that if there's any parts you want to rewatch, you'll be free to do that. Thank you one and all, and have a good weekend.